Okay, so let's continue. Let's look at your answers first. Yeah, so one person had some problem with indentation. Another reminder that it's important to be careful with that when coding with Python. Let's run the code here. Yeah, so this is the output. So basically we have two lists and we are running through both lists using the range function, and we are adding up the two values. So that's the output you get is 1 plus 10, 3 plus 4, 5 plus 6, 7 plus 8, and 9 plus 2. And most of you got it right, which is great. Yeah, the other one. Yeah. For loops condition. Okay, so we covered the for loops, and this is the second part of this lecture. Earlier, David said that in this lecture we are trying to learn how to have control over the flow of our code. One way of doing that was by using the for loops. Now we look at conditional statements, and we see how we can gain more control over our code and how it works using conditional statements. So these are quite intuitive and easy to understand, and they exist in all programming languages. So the idea is basically that you have a conditional statement, and the code, the Python checks whether that conditional statement is true or false. So you use that using an if statement. So if it is true, then you have a certain number of things that would run under your if statement. And if it is false, then you will go to other things that we will see during this lecture now. Yeah, so a simple conditional statement goes like this. So now we have the temperature as a variable 17. So we want to write a very simple code testing that whether the weather is hot or cold based on this temperature. So it goes like this. So temperature is 17. Then so if temperature is greater than, I'm looking for greater than on your keyword. This is David's laptop, so I'm looking for keys here. Okay, yeah, found it. Greater than 25. So note, similar to for loops, once you put the colon, you get indentation. So again, you should think about indentation and using the correct one when writing if statements. So if the temperature is greater than 25, we want it to print. Okay, let's use an F string. Option shift. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I should use my own laptop next time.
Yeah, sorry.
Is hot. So what this basically does, it checks if temperature is greater than 25 degrees Celsius, it will print that it is the temperature is hot. And what if it's not? Then this is how you will Okay, I have a typo.
Yeah, it's the temperature. So for all of them, there should be an E before the R.
Okay.
Temperature. And say for the dip.
Yeah. Okay, now we got it right. So temperature is 17. The if statement, it checks if it is greater than 25 degrees. It will write that temperature is hot, and if it's not true, if the first if statement is not true, it will go and run else. So if it is true, it will not run else. In our case, temperature was 17, which is obviously not greater than 25. That's why the statement we had in our if statement was wrong. It was false, so it just ran what we had under else, which is temperature is not hot. So now let's update the value of the temperature to a hot temperature, see how it works. Let's just copy this code from here. Yeah, so let's just change the temperature to something that is hot. The condition that we were checking for was that temperature is greater than 25. So let's put our temperature to 27. Yeah, so now it says that the temperature is 27 degrees is hot, and it's because it's greater than 25. So if a statement was true, it doesn't run what we had under else. So it is also possible to not write else statement. So in that case, it will just check the if statement, and if it was true, it will do the certain number of tasks that you have listed under the if statement, and if it's not true, then it will just continue with the rest of the code. So it is also possible not to have the else statement. Yeah, let's just try this. So now we do not have the else statement. Yeah, so just nothing happened because if was false, what we had, our if statement was false, so we didn't have else statement, so nothing basically happened after that. Okay, let's try another example, something from more like our everyday life. And getting back to the weather, so we want to check, well, weather is rain. We want to check if weather equals rain. We want to print that where a rain code else okay, so another example, weather is rain, and we check if weather equals rain, print where a raincoat, and if it's not true, then it would print no raincoat is needed. Well, the weather was rain, so Python is telling us that we need to take a raincoat with us that day. So what we have is we have these two equal signs. This is what we write to check if some value is equal to another value. We will see more examples of this a bit later on. Yeah, so one thing to note here is that similar to what we saw in for loops, indentation is important here in Python. Like you saw earlier in Python, you do not write anything. For example, in C language, you use these curly brackets to show that the block of code is ending. We don't have in Python. We don't have that in Python. So the way to tell your code that a certain block is ending is by using correct indentation. So be careful with that. You have again colon here. So after that, Python expects you use correct indentation. And if you don't get it right, then you will get indentation error or syntax error. Okay, so after the if statement, as I said, you have an indentation, so you have a block of code. So it doesn't have to be just one thing that you do there. So you can have multiple lines of code and different things can happen. So for example, again, back to our example with the weather. So if weather equals rain, so here we do two things instead of one. So first we want to print that wear a raincoat. Next we want to print another thing. So this can be basically any function or any other kind of calculation that you want to do. So the point here is that you can do more than one thing once you start your if statement. So you can also instruct the user to wear rain boots. And then we have our else statement, print yeah, so if we run this code, we can see that the if statement was correct because the value weather equaled rain, and we had two lines of code under if statement, both of which were run. So we are getting two instructions, wear a raincoat and also wear rain boots. So let's look at the comparison operators. We have been already seeing them now when I started talking about if statements. So these are what we use in Python. Yeah, so these are some of the signs that you're already familiar with from school. So the operator equal, we have less than or equal to, we have equal to, which is with two equal signs, greater than or equal to, or greater than or not equal to, which is an exclamation mark, and then we have equal. So what these do is basically this creates a statement, a conditional statement, and it checks for the values, for the value of what you have on the two signs of this operator. So it returns a boolean value, which is a binary value telling you whether condition is either true or false. So that's what is returned when you use these statements. Okay. So these are this true and false you saw earlier today. These are also examples of reserved terms in Python. So you cannot, for example, use the word true or false to name your variable. So let's check what the statement would return you. So So this is basically checking if the temperature is greater than 25 or not. It is not, so it's returning a false value. And if we check whether equals rain, it is giving us true value. So this is basically what you're getting when you're using these operators and if statements, and if it is true or false, it will do a certain number of actions for you. Okay, so we have looked at the scenario where you have one if statement. If it is true, it does a number of things for you, and if it is not true, then it goes to the else statement and it will do other things that you have instructed the Python to do for you. What if you have several conditions and you want to check to see whether any of them is true? And if not, then you would move on to running what you have under else. So for that, you should basically instruct Python. Well, you have the if statement. If it's not true, then you have elif, which is else if. So let's see how that works in practice. Option shift. I'm learning how to use your keyboard. Zero. Okay, so what we have here, we have an if statement. The difference here is that, like I said, we have two sets of conditions, so it tests for both of them. So it checks if temperature is greater than 0. If it is, then it's true, it does what you have under the if statement. If it's not, then it just continues in the list, and it continues and checks what you have under elif, and if it is condition. So if the first one is true, then good. It just runs it, that's it. And if not, it goes to else if. It checks the second condition. And then if that one is not true either, then you will have the else statement at the end. So in our case, 17 degrees Celsius is above freezing. So the first condition was true. So the elif and else, it didn't go through those anymore. Okay, now this is on Presemo. Yeah, open the Presemo and try to do this to see how much you have learned. So as you can see, there doesn't have to be only one elif. If there is need for it, you can have multiple like you have in this case. Okay, so most of you have answered only B. Let's run the code and see what we get. Where was that? Yeah, that is correct. So yesterday temperature was 14 degrees, today is 10, tomorrow is 13. So what it does, it compares like yesterday, was it smaller or equal to today? Which is not the case because it was 14 degrees, it's obviously greater than today. But the second, then if, so the first if is false, and the second one, today is not equal to tomorrow. And that is true because today is 10 and tomorrow is 13. So that's why you get, it prints B and that's it. It doesn't run through the rest because it is true now.
And maybe that's worth just emphasizing that even though you have these extra else-if conditions that are still there, once you pass one of the tests inside the chain, you're done. You don't kind of go on and check. Because the else-if is always saying like, okay, well, if that thing above me was not true, continue. So as soon as you get one true statement, you're done with your list of the if statements. So be aware that sometimes you might think that it kind of keeps and will print anytime any of the tests are true, but you have to use separate if statements for that kind of thing, not else-if statements.
Yep. Yeah, okay, so when you're writing if a statement or any conditional statement, you have the possibility of combining your statement, so you can have more than one condition, and that you can do using the logical operators and or. So again, another keyword in Python, and or. So when you use and, so you have two conditions, A and B. When you have and in between them, it means that the statement is true if both A and B are true. So if one of them is false, the statement would return false to you. And with or, it's true if either A or B is true. So if you have two conditions and there is or between them, if one of them is true, you will get true as the output. So let's see how this works in practice. If 1 greater than 0. Okay, so what we are doing here, we have an if statement again, but we have two conditions here. So if 1 is greater than 0 and -1 is greater than 1, it would print both parts are true, which is not the case. 1 is greater than 0, but -1 is not greater than 0, so one of them is false. So what it returns us is false. Therefore, what we get as a result is what is under our else statement. So it prints that at least one part is not true. Let's try another one. So if what did I do? Yeah, so here we have another if statement, but with using or in between the two conditions we have. So this is checking if 1 is smaller than 0 or -1 is smaller than 0, then it will print something. So the first condition is obviously wrong because 1 is not smaller than 0, but the second one is correct. -1 is smaller than 0. Because we have used or in between and one of them is true, then it returns true as the value. Yeah, later during this course, we see that we can also use these bitwise operators instead of and or. So we will see that later during this course. Okay, let's test another one. If equals okay. Okay, so if we have two variables, weather is rain and wind speed is 9, and imagine we have gotten the data from the Meteorological Institute. So we are checking for, we are checking if weather equals rain or wind speed is greater or equal to 8, you should just stay home. Well, I have a typo there, but don't mind it. So just to stay home if one of them is true. So, and if else, then just go out and enjoy. In our case, weather is rain and wind speed is 9. So both of them are correct. Both of them are true. So it's just telling you that you should stay home. So we have seen for loops today now, and now we practiced a bit how to work with conditional statements. So one very useful thing in programming is to combine the two to have even more control over the flow of your code. So let's see how that works. Yeah, so what we have here is we are combining for loops and conditional statements. So we have a list of temperatures from 0 to 30, and we are going through each of the items in our list, and for each item we are checking whether the temperature is greater than 25 or not. If it is greater than 25, it's going to go and print that it's hot, and if it's not true, then we have the else statement, which prints us that it is not true. So we can see it goes one by one through each of the items we have in our list, and it tests whether it's hot or not. And you can see for the first item in our list, which is 0, it's saying that it's not hot. For the second one, 28, it is greater than 25, so obviously the condition is true, and it's printing that it is hot, and so on to the end of our list. Yeah, do you have any questions from if statements and how we combined it with for loops?
Would it be more convenient to have the number, like the actual temperature, also on the printed list now? Because now it's not hot, but it's not really printing out the list. How can we combine that?
Yeah, that would have definitely looked better. I just went for the lazy solution. So if you just put a f string, you can pass in the value to the string and print it out. Yeah, it would definitely look nicer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the example on the course page is formatted like that, so it shows the temperature number and then whatever is hot or is not hot. So you can see the example there from the course page if you want to see how it was done there. But
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah, so it's easy. You just add f string. You can just add the f like we have seen before, and then just Option Shift.
yeah, I'm unfortunately suffering from using
Yeah, I'm
Mac,
suffering.
So
Temperature. So like that. See. Yeah, so this looks much better. I have to remove it from it, but forgive the grammatical problem. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so if no questions, then you obviously get to practice these for loops and conditional statements more during your exercises and during the exercise this week. But before we finish, one more of these good practice, good coding practices, good coding practice number 3. So as we have talked before during this course, and you will hear more during this course, when you're writing the code, you might think that it is easy. You will remember what you're doing, what you mean by every line you write. It might be so for small programs where you have only a few lines of code, but soon you will see as your programs get a bit longer, if you do not write them properly, it will not only be, well, you will have difficulty on remembering them later. It won't be so readable by you. So you have to put a lot of effort every time you want to look at your code to find out if something has gone wrong or if you want to change something. But also very often in the professional world, when you write a code, you might want to share it with other people. So if you have made it readable, they will thank you for that. So they can also use your code. So very often we have a working code, but meaning that the Python will not complain about anything. So you don't have any syntax error. You have taken care of all the indentations. So there is no problem with that. You run the code, you get your results. But that does not necessarily mean that your code is readable by humans. So yeah, this is an example of a situation when someone else looks at your code and tries to find out what your code does, and you see that it can be very complicated if the code is not written well. So there are different sources for finding the best practices for coding. So for example, you can refer to these coding conventions, but a lot of things that you will see there we haven't yet learned doing with Python. So we would advise you to check those coding conventions regularly as you learn more of Python, you would check that regularly to see how you can make your codes more readable and write them in a better way. So one example of there are this PEP 8 style guide that you can check. There is the link on the courses webpage that they give you coding conventions that help you write the code in a more readable way for humans. Like I said, very often you write a code and it works. Python has no problem running the code, but the code is written badly, so it's difficult for you or other people to understand the code. So as I said, many of the things you see on this page you may not have learned yet in Python, but you should check it regularly. But just a few things you can look. I'm not going to go through all the details, but on this page you have some information and you can follow the link to read more. So for example, we have some of the guidelines here regarding the maximum line lengths, that you shouldn't make the lines of code too long. PEP8 gives us that guides us to limit all the lines to 79 characters max, and in case of comments with multi-line or single line, it should be limited to 72 characters. So there are a lot of these good practices that you should be familiar with in order to make your code more readable. There are also guidelines regarding the indentation. We have seen that it's important to be careful with those. Well, if you are careless with it, you might get errors, but also if you don't use them nicely, the code may not be so readable if you look at it later. So it's good to follow to check out the conventions and see what are the best practices of using indentations. There are also here guidelines on how to use the spaces or where to add the spaces or avoid putting too much spaces that you should maybe check on your own. Yep. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we've already seen, for example, with the indentation, that Python can be a little bit more picky than other programming languages about certain things. Like you can't have a for loop or a conditional statement without indented text underneath it. That will result in a syntax error because Python assumes that if you put if, that you actually want the code to do something. Some other programming languages may let you have an if statement that doesn't actually do anything, but in Python you'll get a syntax error. So it will enforce certain things, but this style guide is something that's more like for making the code easy to read, as Kamir was saying. But yeah, if there's no questions at this point, let's take a look at this week's exercise. And if any questions come up, of course, you can always ask then. But yeah, here we are in exercise number 3. Again, you'll be working in pairs on this exercise, and you'll be alternating with whoever was the driver for exercise number 2. It should be the other pair, or for the few groups of 3 that we have, just check to see in the list of drivers to see who is the driver for this week. But you'll see that we have 4 problems in this week's exercise. There's actually 3 problems that are graded and a 4th problem that is optional. So if you're interested for an extra little challenge, you can do, for instance, problem number 4. But I'll just open up these notebooks quickly. I think there's really nothing special here in the README file. Exercise is due in 1 week from today, same as usual. And yeah, so we have our 4 notebooks for the 4 different problems. The first one is some practice with using for loops. And the idea with this exercise is to do something that's a sort of common task. When we start dealing with data files, oftentimes you want to go through and batch process your data, which means reading in multiple data files and doing the same set of actions on each data file. Oftentimes, the first step in that process is to create a list of file names that you want to then process. So this exercise basically is built around the idea of making a list of file names where you define some base name. So for instance, our base name here is going to be called station. Then you add in some number to produce a list that ultimately looks like this. So we have the base name station, you have an underscore character, and then some number, and then you add in this file extension .txt. So the goal is to produce this Python list that contains these station text file names that we would potentially be able to read in and use to do some kind of batch processing. That is more or less the essence of the first problem in the exercise. And once you've done that, there's a couple spots or a couple short questions here at the end where you could, for instance, give your kind of free and open feedback about the concept of a loop and things that are or are not clear to you about using Python loops. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 allows you to involve both, if I'm not mistaken, there would be loops and conditional statements here. So we have a list of temperatures, and we're going to classify those temperatures based on 4 different classifications. So cold, slippery, comfortable, and warm. So cold for us is going to be anything less than -2. Slippery is between -2 and up to, but not including +2. Comfortable is going to be between +2 and +15, and warm would be warmer than +15. And what you have in this case, if you look at your data, is I think this is 1 month's worth of daily temperatures from April 2013 from the Helsinki-Malmi airport. And what you're going to do is use this list of temperatures to go through and figure out how many days was it cold, slippery, warm, or comfortable. And so you'll have these 4 empty lists, and you're going to put the temperatures into those lists based on the conditions that you have there that are defined for what the cold, slippery, comfortable, and warm temperature ranges would be. Then after that, you're asked a couple questions here about like how many times was it slippery, how many times was it warm, whatever. And if you'd like, then you can give some feedback as well at the end about conditional statements and whether the idea of a conditional statement is clear to you. Third problem is about classifying
The weather stations, I think these are weather stations in Finland that are more than 70 years old, just to give us a manageable number of them to work with. And we've defined some kind of arbitrary central point based on latitude and longitude in the country, and then we're going to divide our weather stations into those that are in the northwest, northeast, southeast, or southwest of this arbitrary geographical boundary that's been drawn here. So what you're going to use in this case is, again, for loop and conditional statements. You're given, if I'm not mistaken, here, 3 lists. So you can see you have a list of latitude, a list of longitude, and a list of station names. And then you have these cutoff positions. So the north-south cutoff, if it's greater than 64.5 degrees north, it's considered in the north. And if it's less than that, it's considered in the south. And the same thing goes for the east-west cutoff. You're given these values. And your task is basically to create some lists and then distribute these different stations into the respective lists. And again, like the case what you had with the classifying of temperatures, you're going to have some print statements that tell you the names of the stations in the northwest and northeast, southwest, and southeast. And then there's some open feedback. And if you want, there's an extra little problem here at the end. If you want to figure out what percentage of the stations are in the different areas, you can do some math to get that to calculate what percentage of the stations are in different parts of the country. So those are the 3 graded problems. The ungraded or optional problem that doesn't affect your grade is using what are called nested for loops. So basically putting a for loop inside of another for loop. So there's a kind of silly example here of like looping over the characters in dog and the characters in cat, printing both of them, and you get this kind of garbled mess of output here. But the more interesting question here is that you're going to be asked to produce this kind of American flag inspired string of characters where you have some stars and some hyphens, and you're going to use 2 for loops to basically reproduce this pattern such that when you print the variable flag, it prints this to the screen. So if you're up for a little bit of a challenge, this is an interesting way to see how the for loops work when you put them together into what they're called nested loops, where you have one inside of another. This is quite a common thing to be doing when you're dealing with geographical data sets. I don't do sort of GIS stuff myself very often in Python, but essentially whenever you have multiple dimensions like latitude and longitude, it's quite common to be going like looping over all the latitude values and finding all the points that have corresponding longitude to look at them. Or if you have a grid of points like in sort of regularly spaced grid of points, it's quite common to use nested loops to go from like row by row, and then within each row go point by point across the row. So useful thing to learn how to do if you're up for it, and again, that problem is just an optional thing. So that's exercise number 3. Are there any questions about the exercise? So maybe I'll just do an informal poll. Like, how many of you feel like you've got somewhat of an understanding about these for loops? Like, maybe you could raise your hand if you feel like. Okay, so kind of a little more than half. Maybe how about for conditional statements? Okay, so maybe slightly better for conditional statements. We were debating about whether we flip this to introduce conditional statements first because they're a little easier to understand. So maybe we'll think about that for the future. But anyway, as usual, we will have the exercise help sessions on Thursday and Friday, where you can just drop into either one, whatever you like, and get some help with the exercise if you're having any trouble. The deadline for exercise number 2 has been extended to 12 o'clock on Wednesday. I just posted a message in Discord about that a little bit ago. So for anybody, if your partner is not here, for instance, just maybe let them know that the exercise deadline has been extended. And otherwise, if there are any questions or anything that you need individually, Kamyar and I will be here for a little bit after class, and you're of course welcome to post in Discord. I think that's it otherwise, so good luck with the exercise, and we'll see you next week for our lesson on functions.